All right, I'm with my friend Craig Bussey from Vancouver, now transplanted in Charlottetown. Bus is a Wellington Cup player, great player, knows Kelly Murray real well. They grew up in Marine Drive together. Bus is a big hitter. He's 65. He's a perfect example of what we're trying to show here today, which is how to use rotational forces and lateral forces combined, and or one or the other. And Bus, how would you define yourself, as a rotational player or a lateral player?
Lateral.
All right, so let's just take a swing and see what we got on just your normal swing, okay? Okay, so Bus, you hit that 215 yards. You've warmed up. We've consistently seen you hit it that distance. So you've got a bit of, well, basically a lateral trace, but there's quite a gap between your heel and your toe and your trace.
Yeah.
Regardless, at impact in both models here, your peak velocity was 314 centimeters per second. That's the speed of your lateral motion. Your dynamic vertical force, max 0.0309. And what we're going to do on the next swing is to do some rotational stuff.
Okay.
And we're going to get you to do a big hip turn back and through, let you hit a couple shots, and we're going to see how that impacts both your lateral speed, your vertical forces, and the distance, okay? And again, we're going to talk to you about this. We're going to get a Bus to do a big hip turn back and a big hip turn through.
Okay.
So we want to use some rotational forces here and see how that affects a lateral golfer. So Bus, just give me a second. I'm going to set up and we're going to get you on that mat, and away we're going to go. Okay, Bus just crushed that. Bus, you smoked that, baby. So what we're going to see here, and Bus, I'm going to get you to hold the camera for me. Bus, as you hit that 218.4 yards, come take a look.
Okay.
On the flight scope. I can back out a little bit now. And so what we saw here is the dynamic vertical forces didn't really increase too much. But what was significant is that the velocity, the peak velocity laterally slowed down to 255 centimeters per second from 315 plus.
Wow.
The trace kind of remained the same, but the distance increased. So by incorporating a little bit of rotational forces into your swing, you already even hit it a little further and you hit it amazingly far as it is. So step two was trying to incorporate some rotational forces, seeing how that impacts A, distance, and B, dynamic vertical forces, and C, velocity chart, which this seems to be consistent in all my trials.
Yeah.
And now, Bus, what I'm going to try to do next is I'm going to try to change your trace, improve your trace by getting those two lines, the line going back and the line going through together a little closer, which will decrease the dispersion.
Okay.
And also we want to see if we can increase the lateral speed. Okay?
Good.
What we're going to do in this next one is we're going to try to improve your trace and see how that affects the dynamic vertical forces and the lateral speed. So our belief is that the toes are the brakes, the heels are the accelerators, the ankles are the shock absorber and the propulsion system. Now we noticed that in this trace here, Bus, there's quite a distance between the line going back and the line going through. And what I want to get you to do on this one, Bus, is I want to get you to curl up your toes in those snow boots.
Okay.
And we're going to see how it impacts the trace, the lateral speeds, and the vertical forces.
So curl up my toes.
Inside of it, curl them up, not down.
During the swing.
At address, and leave them there.
Okay.
All throughout the swing.
Okay.
And don't worry about your hip rotation. Just normal swing, hang on. All right, Bus, here we go. So we're gonna get the pressure mapping all set up. We're gonna get you to stand on it. We're gonna get you to curl those toes up in those boots.
Okay.
The Snead drill, and we're gonna see how it affects everything. When you're ready? Oh wow, good trace.
Feel like I have a swing.
All right, bad results, good trace. So what happened there? Bus lost a ton of distance. His lateral speed went up to 443 centimeters per second. So obviously I know that Craig is a combination of lateral and rotational forces because that's when he hits it best. He primarily used his lateral speed there and he lost a ton of distance. Very interesting. His dynamic vertical forces went down significantly. I mean, like almost to nothing. And that's also a part of the learning curve. So it's trying to find out what works for your golfer. And we know as we get older that if you don't have a little bit of rotational forces, you're going to lose a ton of speed. So in a way, or a ton of yardage. So in a way, this is actually working because in this model here, and I want to show you this, and again, this is the X Series, so this is good, bad, and the ugly. Hit that 149.6. His lateral speed rapidly increased. He overspeeded. We call that an aviation VNE, velocity never to exceed. And we know from years of experience, touring pros will move it around 250 to 325 centimeters per second. Okay, so this was really interesting. So Bus was able to increase his lateral speed to 443 centimeters a second. And what happened here is that the lateral speed increased. He didn't get as much hip rotation. and the vertical forces went down significantly. So in my assessment, based on the data, good and bad, is that Craig is uses a combination of both lateral and rotational forces during his swing, much like Justin James, who's a massively power hitter. And Bus, I'm going to ask you for the interview. I'm going to turn that camera on you and ask you your opinion on that.
Sure.
Interesting research today. Generally speaking, my conclusion is that if you're a pure rotational player, the lateral speed will be low in centimeters per second. We were able to, by getting you to curl up your toes and then taking some swings on the Moflex with 20-degree angle pitch up, dorsiflexion. You did increase the lateral speed significantly, but we did not get a distance gain. In fact, we got a distance loss. So in your case, my assumption would be, or my conclusion would be, is that you use a combination of both lateral and rotational forces to get the distance, the maximum distance that you get. Any thoughts?
Absolutely. And when I was younger, obviously, much younger guy, that left heel used to come up off the ground more like a Nicholas, more like a Tom Watson. And as I've gotten older, I don't have that flexibility or mobility to be able to do those things. So this is a natural swing for me today. But part of that is flexibility. I do go to the gym 3-4 times a week. I think that's a big part of it.
Right. So I appreciate it, man.
Hey, warming up. Joe's a goalie, and he's a great golfer. He's becoming a great golfer. Joe, yesterday you were telling us about injuries that goalies sustain because of lateral or rotational forces. Tell us about that.
A lot of goalies sustain a lot of injuries and long-term injuries, and they have to end up having hip surgery because they do a lot of hip rotation when they're in the net and in their position.
Right, and we've noticed Joe is a heavy rotational player, unlike Craig Bussey, who uses lateral forces, pardon me. Joe is primarily a rotational player. We'll see what the lateral forces, how that impacts his distance. Okay, let's go.
Coming up, and we've got the flight scope and the V1. I know Joe's trace is nice trace there, by the way. And Joe's another big hitter, 212 with the 5-iron. I'm jealous as heck. So we're going to get you just to warm up a little bit. And again, we know that Joe is a heavy rotational player, so we're going to incorporate some lateral motion and see how it affects his trace, distance, etc. 5-iron. Really high dynamic vertical forces. His lateral speed's 312. He's got a ton of rotational forces from playing hockey. Rotational forces, a lot of hip turn, a lot of shoulder turn. You can see it in the swing. Massive shoulder turn. Here we go. Here we go. Sorry, real big shoulder turn. Look at that. Right to, and his lead arm is very straight. It's really good. But what we're going to do here is we're going to show you when we incorporate more lateral motion, how things slow down for Joe. Okay. We begin, Joe. What we're going to do here is the Nicholas drill. So demonstrate the Nicholas drill. There you go. So we're going to, you don't have to lift it up that high, but what we're trying to do here is to show you the effects when we take out the rotational forces and how that changes the lateral speeds and the vertical forces. Okay. And distance. Okay. So in the first swing, his max was 464 vertical. In the second swing, it was reduced from to 218. But take a look at the difference in the traces. So this is a normal rotational trace for Joe, where he actually uses both lateral and rotational forces, but he's a big rotator because of his sport, hockey. Really high vertical forces. On the right-hand corner, it's got a number there, 464. On this one, a max of 218, so it reduced the vertical forces by half. That's basically 2.18 times his body weight and basically 4 times his body weight normally. And he hit that 207, which basically was no distance loss, but the way we understand it, because the line is a line on line, not only did it reduce the backing up in the trace, it also, the dispersion was tight. Now what's interesting is that his lateral speed actually decreased by not incorporating some of his normal hip turn. What's also interesting, as we know for certain, is that his vertical forces went down to 2.65 times his body weight. So the question then becomes, do we want to play with all rotational forces? Do we want to incorporate some rotational forces as well as lateral motion? And in my opinion, the combination of using both will reduce the chance for back injuries and spine injuries due to coming into the ball at impact in an unstable and non-dynamic balanced manner. So that would be what I would recommend. So the conclusion of all this is a little different for each golfer. The one thing we know for sure is that as we cleaned up Joe's trace here, go ahead. We worked, when he did a lateral motion, when he did the Nicholas drill, the trace was more lateral. He had no backup at impact. You can see that also on the velocity chart. That's going to be part of our next discussion. What was surprising is that when I take a rotational golfer and get them to move laterally more, their lateral speed decreases. If I take a lateral golfer like Craig Bussey or myself and I incorporate some rotational forces, my actual speed will increase. So it's almost exact opposite. So there's a lot to be learned here, and this is Terry Hashimoto with the BodiTrak X Series. It's a start, and the more we talk about it, the more we learn together, and the more we learn together, the more we can help our golfers. Terry Hashimoto, BodiTrak X.